Hi, Dr. Wally Taylor with Forum Health Rollingwood, formerly known as Texas Integrative Medicine. And I have a short video that I'm excited to share with you about some information that I just recently learned. A lot of you that follow me on my YouTube channel and my Facebook page and are guests of us here in the clinic know that I've always been really interested in the role of our mitochondria in contributing to chronic illness, especially chronic illness from environmental toxins such as chemicals, mold, electromagnetic, and infections such as viruses and bacteria. And a lot of you know that I've also been a real proponent of the mitochondrial cell danger response, which is a hypothesis about the mitochondria, which has been forwarded by a very brilliant scientist from the University of California, San Diego, named Dr. Robert Naviaux. And you also know that we've said that Dr. Naviaux probably deserves a Nobel Prize for his work on the mitochondria. But basically, Dr. Naviaux, who in addition to being a brilliant physician, scientist trained in the mitochondria and runs a special mitochondrial lab in San Diego, was also trained in virology by Dr. Jonas Salk. And many of you know that he was behind the developments of the cures for polio. He also has a lot of knowledge about the role of RNA retroviruses. But Dr. Naviaux has come out with a series of articles since 2014 that talks about the way stress in our world and a whole bunch of toxic stresses from our environment actually triggers a problem with our mitochondria that ends up leading to mitochondrial dysfunction and a loss of energy. So I think that this goes a long way to explaining the severe persistent fatigue and exercise intolerance that seems to be a real hallmark of the patients I see with chronic illness caused by environmental toxins. Well, I'm going to say, let's put that aside for just a second, because what I want to focus on today is an exciting new line of research that Dr. Naviaux has recently published along with another researcher, Dr. Bhupesh Prusty, who is a virologist from the University of Würzburg in Germany. And together, they just published a new article, and I will put a link to that article in the show notes for this video. But basically, what they've shown together is that they worked with two viruses, the HHV6 and the HHV7. Some would call these herpes virus 6 and herpes virus 7. And basically what they have been able to show is that when these viruses are present in the body and become reactivated, that they actually excrete a small piece of RNA, which actually plays a role somehow in triggering a change in the mitochondria that results in fragmentation and decreased energy output of the mitochondria. And it also causes the body to be protected against other virus infections at that time. So in other words, when HHV6 or HHV7 is in the body, and let me just say here that both of these viruses are actually extremely common. And it's thought that in most of us, we acquire these viruses as infants, usually because they're transmitted to us from our mother, especially the mother's saliva. So it's not uncommon at all for us to carry these viruses more or less dormant in our systems. But it turns out that they can become reactivated. And that doesn't necessarily mean reactivated in the sense that the numbers of viral particles would dramatically increase in our body, but that something triggers these viruses to actually create this small piece of RNA. And remember, RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, which is one of the life molecules like DNA. And let me remind you too that the COVID-19 virus, the coronavirus that causes the pandemic, is actually one of these RNA viruses. That means that its genetic material that allows it to create new copies of itself or to procreate has to do with RNA. So anyway, going back to what Dr. Naviaux and Dr. Prusty have recently published, is that probably for a large number of the cases of chronic fatigue syndrome, some people call it ME/CFS, which is another name that the chronic fatigue syndrome goes by, that it may actually, in quite a few cases, have to do with the presence of these very, very common herpes family viruses, which are actually in most of us, and may become reactivated, typically because of stress or a co-infection or exposure to some other toxic in the environment, perhaps even electromagnetic frequency exposure or mold toxins or chemical toxins or toxic metals like mercury and lead. But in any case, when these viruses become reactivated, they will actually create a small segment of RNA, which they release, and somehow that causes a transformational change in the mitochondria, which, even though it does make the body more resistant to other viruses, which is a good thing, at the same time, it comes at a cost of causing some fragmentation and some other dysfunction of mitochondria, which ends up leading to decreased formation of ATP, which you remember is the product of our mitochondria, which generates all of our life energy that we need for all of the other metabolic processes in our body. So if we can figure out exactly what exactly triggers this and how can we hopefully learn to control it or throttle it, I think that will go a long way to help us understand how we can intervene in many of these cases of chronic fatigue. And in my practice of environmental illness, I will tell you that chronic fatigue is the number one symptom of illness, which is present in about 95% of the patients that I see with persistent illness due to exposure to stress and environmental toxins. So I'm looking forward to more information that Dr. Naviaux and Dr. Prusty and some of these other scientists are going to come out with. I think it does tie together with this whole concept of the cell danger response being triggered by environmental toxins and stresses. And again, it has to do with one of the most important things that we can learn to control to try to interrupt the systems of persistent disease. And of course, a lot of it does have to do with avoidance of exposure whenever possible to as many of these environmental toxic exposures and stress. And I think it also goes back to what I've said in earlier videos, that anything we can do to help the brain, the threat brain, migrate from a place of fight, flight, freeze and go to a place of calm and tranquility, that this also seems to play a major role in interrupting the cell danger response. So I look forward to your feedback on this. Hopefully, if it's been helpful, you'll share it with friends and family, and follow us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. I'm also available to answer questions, available for consultation. You can contact us through Forum Health or calling our office directly. So I hope this has been beneficial. I hope everybody's staying safe and socially distancing themselves, at least for now, to try to avoid the pandemic effects.